So tell me a little bit about pedagogical materials.
Sure. So the Dell program is documenting endangered languages. And if you look at the past history of Dell, you'll see that a lot of their money goes to several categories like grammars, dictionaries, and texts. And there aren't actually a lot of examples of projects that have been funded for pedagogical materials. So we actually need to start there. Is it possible to fund a pedagogical project of some sort? And I would say that it is, but in some ways it's new territory. So we have a kind of mismatch in the funding organizations. We have the Administration for Native Americans, which is well known for funding pedagogical materials and especially immersion schools and things like that. And then through NSF and NEH, we have the Dell program, and that primarily is going to documentation projects, which tend to be more for academic audiences. So the question you raise is a larger audience. Can there be some blending between the two, and can they support each other? And I think they definitely can. But sometimes you might want to pitch the proposal into one of the more traditional areas and be explicit about how you are blending the two categories to some extent. That's what I would do. So I'd actually like to talk about those three traditional areas of grammar, dictionaries, and texts, and how they can be adapted and pitched more toward communities. So I work with tribes in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Florida, and one of the things I hear all the time is we don't want to put our language in a bottle. We want to keep it alive. And yet if you look at the projects that are funded, they tend to be more museum-oriented. So it's important for anyone who's in the community to be able to balance the two and show that it is collaborative and that everyone is benefiting from the project. So my feeling is you will get better documentation if in the same project you also do revitalization to some extent. Let's start with a text project. So for a linguist, a text project generally means that they want spontaneous speech, that it's unscripted. And if I'm doing a text project, it can be almost any type of conversation. And I am thrilled to have the language transcribed and translated, and I'd like to have it on my computer where I can do searches and things like that. I'm not so concerned about the content. And this is where there are real possibilities for working with the tribe to figure out what the tribe would value and what they would like to keep in their archives and to pass down to their kids and grandkids. So just starting a project with a conversation like that is really valuable. We can also take grammars and talk about how those can be adapted. Linguists make a distinction between textbooks and reference grammars. And usually if you apply to Dell, you're applying to do a reference grammar. And community members usually find it very difficult to use a reference grammar. They're really written for someone with a Ph.D. in linguistics. And in the last couple of weeks, I've had really heartbreaking emails from people who are native speakers of Muskogee who are trying to use a grammar that I wrote and they just can't understand it. So we have to think very hard about the audience and the broader impact of these grants that we're writing. And it's not that hard to shift a reference grammar towards something that we call a teaching grammar, or even something that we would call a textbook that has a much broader audience. The audience of academic linguists that will use a reference grammar is actually very, very small. But if you start bringing in the community members, it actually broadens the impact, it broadens the audience, and can be much more important. And that's something that NSF actually looks at. So the community needs to consider the different audiences, the academic audience and the community audience, and also the format of the final work. Will it be published? Will it be published only through the tribe? These are things that we need to consider. So right now I'm doing some work with the Coushatta tribe in Louisiana, and in this case there is an existing reference grammar, but the reference grammar is very detailed, but it's organized the way a linguist would organize it. And tribal members have a hard time using it and making use of the material. So what we're trying to do now is create a teaching grammar that's organized in a very different way. And the way we're doing it is actually we're making constructed conversations. And so we'll have a conversation between two people. And then we write that conversation out and go over it. And as we go over the conversation, we pull grammar out and put that into the teaching grammar. So we're basically creating two books that will support the community. One is a textbook, and the other is a teaching grammar. And they're both covering grammar, but they're covering it in different ways. For me, the teaching grammar is specific to what you might call constructions. So there might be a particular ending that is a particular tense, and there needs to be something like a lesson just on that one ending. And so we pull grammar from the conversations out, and then we put that in the teaching grammar, and then we ask speakers to find more examples like that. You have this word with this ending. Can you think of more expressions like that? And they volunteer examples in a community meeting, and we write them all down, and then we try to put the explanation in there that isn't too technical. You don't have to use jargon in a teaching grammar. You don't have to use infix and prefix and these terms that no one understands. You can just use ending instead of suffix. And it becomes kind of a challenge. I think almost any linguist can write for a non-technical audience, but we're not forced to do that. And so one of the important things is to have a careful conversation with everyone involved and be clear about what the target audience is. And you can just have a strict cutoff point. You can say, we want this aimed at the 7th grade, for example, right? And so adapt the work for that. The last topic is dictionary. And there again, the first thing that a linguist tends to think about is something like the Oxford English Dictionary. It's maybe a historical dictionary. It's scholarly. It has footnotes and lots of sources, but that might not be what the community has in mind. It could be that if the community doesn't have a long history of writing the language, that they would be more comfortable with what we call a topical dictionary, where everything is arranged by animals or plants or by areas that are more important culturally, right? So those are things that can be done separately and that can lead into an alphabetical dictionary later. These days, some tribes are more interested in what I would call student dictionaries because their kids no longer speak the language. And so what they would actually like is a dictionary that teaches people how to use the language rather than a dictionary that documents all of the detailed knowledge that the elders have. So those are different types of dictionaries that a tribe can do. And they're all valuable, but they're done in slightly different ways. And the whole team needs to have a conversation about the type of product that they would like and the balance of these areas that they would have. One thing I've noticed is when I talk to people about dictionaries, they often have one favorite dictionary in mind. And they haven't necessarily looked at a lot of different dictionaries to see what's out there. And that one dictionary can influence people in many different ways, from the way words are defined to the parts of speech labels that they have. And so I would really encourage anyone who's thinking about doing a dictionary to have lots of different conversations with people, and not just with people their own age. They need to be talking to kids, because if you talk to kids, you'll find that kids don't use paper dictionaries anymore. They use their phones. They use their computers. And that's a huge shift that we're going through right now, is the shift from book dictionaries to online dictionaries. It has a huge impact. I think it's probably still safer to apply to Dell in the three traditional areas of dictionary, text, and grammar. But Dell also loves to get exciting projects that mix that up and challenge us in different ways. If you choose to do a dictionary project, one of the questions is, how can you benefit the community and build support within the community while you're doing a dictionary? And this is a really important question to ask when you're doing a dictionary. To do a really good dictionary can easily take 10 years. So the danger that you have is that the community is going to lose patience. And what you need to do is anticipate that and try to build a model, a work model, into the project where you're constantly getting results out to the community, giving them a chance to see it and to judge it, and giving the community a chance to realize that you're actually doing a lot of work and you're making progress. So if I were having a conversation with the community, I would try to have smaller dictionaries that build into a larger dictionary project. And one way that you can do this is to first do a topical dictionary, a dictionary that's arranged by topics. And so for this, you might have a cutoff point of, say, 1,500 words. That's usually a nice little hefty dictionary. And for that, you might have a list of animals and numbers and colors, and then branch off into whatever is important culturally. It might be a list of place names or clans or anything like that that could also be used in building lessons for kids. And if the writing system isn't accepted within the community, this gives you a chance to try that out. So you build a smaller dictionary that is topical, and you get to test out your community structure and your language committee and see if that whole process works. Get that product out to the community and see what their reaction to it is. Do they not like some of the spellings that you're using? Do they not like some of the definitions that you have? And then you incorporate that feedback, and then you try to do a revised version of that and send that out. And in the meantime, you're working on the larger goal of trying to do the larger dictionary. So it's a kind of strategy to build community support, and it's extremely important, I think.